Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at The Killing Ground, written by Graham McNeil. Now, you may remember a review I did a while ago on a book called The Chapters Due. And at the time, that was the last book in the Ultramarine series, which was all written by Graham McNeil. And The Killing Ground takes place a few books before The Chapters Due, but it is not the first book in the series. You see, the series started with the Ultramarines Omnibus, which contained the Nightbringer, Warriors of Ultramar, and Dead Sky Black Sun. And The Killing Ground takes place right after that omnibus. And of course, there's a little bit of discussion at the time if I should start the series with The Chapters Due without reading the first few books. And right on cue. Seems like we've been here before. So, you're not going to complain to me about it this time? I've already gone over this with you, so there's really no point. Wait, that was getting kind of old. Now, while starting the series from the beginning is perhaps the best way to get into any series, I will admit that it's probably not necessary. But you see, with The Chapters Due, you can start off with that book without being confused. And what do you think about this book? Not really. I guess it's time for my cameo to be over. Ta-ta. And now that we got that annoyance out of the way, let's start talking about The Killing Ground. And just a small FYI, there's probably going to be some spoilers in this if you haven't read the Omnibus. See, this story continues the adventure of Uriel Ventus, a former captain of the Ultramarines, and a fellow Ultramarine sergeant called Pausanias. And that's at least probably about as close as I'm going to be able to pronounce his name correctly. And this is where we're going to run into a small problem if this is going to be the first book you read in the series. Because it feels like, and I'm only guessing here because I haven't read the Omnibus, but it feels like that this book takes place directly after the events that happened in the book previous to this. And there's little to no recap on what happened. It wasn't too bad for me because I had an idea of what was going on after reading The Chapters Due and the short story that appeared in the Legends of the Space Marine book that took place somewhere within the Omnibus. I was able to piece together what was going on, so it wasn't too confusing for me. For anybody else that didn't read any of that, it might be a little bit tough. But let's ignore that for now and try to take the book as it is. We start off the book with Uriel and Pausanias arriving on this Imperial world via the Doom train from Final Fantasy VIII, along with some deranged Shambling mutants called the Unflesh. Now, from what I could gather what the Unflesh were, they were normal humans, mainly children, who were corrupted and warped within the Eye of Terror, and became insidious monsters that Uriel and Pausanias ended up freeing. So I can only gather that a lot of heavy stuff went down in the book previous to this. Because I find it kind of odd that a Space Marine, especially an Ultramarine, will be teaming up with a bunch of mutants. Especially warped, changed mutants. But the thing is about the Unflesh, is for me personally, they were probably the most sympathetic characters in the entire book. Because you have these creatures that, while they worship the Emperor, they were just so tortured and twisted within the Eye of Terror by chaos. And they're just trying to look for some type of redemption, or salvation rather. But because they look like these hideous mutant monsters, it's not going to be an easy thing for them to try to assimilate back into humanity. In fact, it's probably damn near impossible. Not to mention, these giant, dangerous creatures are mainly children. And throughout most of the book, I was more interested in their story than anything else that was going on. But we'll get into that later. Apparently, Uriel and Pausanias ended up escaping the clutches of chaos and did some heavy damage to them somehow, someway, I'm not exactly sure. And they randomly ended up on this Imperial planet that is caught up in a sort of a civil war. And these two Ultramarines aren't exactly meant for a warm welcome. Especially since the place they popped up in The Killing Ground, is a place of a horrific tragedy that happened on this planet. And it's sort of considered to be haunted. So when the Imperial Guard show up, or the Planetary Defense show up and find two Space Marines out of nowhere, kind of chilling out in this haunted ground, it raised a few eyebrows. So we're following the story with Uriel, the rule-breaker of the Ultramarines, trying to prove that he's a loyal servant to the Emperor, to what appears to be possibly a corrupted government, or at least a power-mad general, that is constantly being assailed by rebel forces. And even though it's pretty clear that they're trying to make the planetary leaders look like the villains, you're not too sure that the rebels aren't themselves another type of evil, or if they're just really good, made out to be evil. And during all this drama with the planet politics, Uriel and Pausanias, they just want to try to contact the Ultramarines to get back to the homeworld. And while we do see like a general camaraderie between Uriel and Pausanias, and how even though Space Marines are like these superhuman demigods among humanity, that are capable of some type of human commotion or connection. And the interaction between the two characters was really great, I thought. But all the while, I just wasn't really too interested in that because I wanted to know more about the Unflesh and what they were going through. And it's quite sad what happens to these characters. Because while I did mention that the Killing Ground was considered to be haunted, well, it really was haunted. And the Unflesh are the ones that pay the consequences for that. Every time the story cuts back to them on how they're trying to reclaim their humanity and gain some type of salvation, they get hurt. And you think they're going to turn away from the Emperor because they're getting hurt. But then they rally back from that and they regain their faith. And it keeps going back and forth. And then they get haunted and then possessed. And I really felt bad with what was going on with these characters. Now, I didn't read the book before this, so this is the first time I was introduced to the characters. And to get that kind of connection with these creatures that don't take the majority of the book at all, and instantly feel sympathy for them, was, in my opinion, a very strong part of the book. And without giving away too many spoilers on this book, I know I already kind of spoiled a little bit of stuff from the other book. The events that were happening with the planet being haunted, with the spirits coming from the Killing Ground, affecting not only the Unflesh, but everybody on the planet. And when that comes to its final conclusion, and how it keeps building up and building up, the final conclusion wasn't as satisfying as I was hoping it would be. Because it seemed that a lot of the stuff that was going on before that, to trying to prevent these events that were going on, was really quite pointless. And it just seemed that the more they tried to stop it, the more bad was happening. And if they just let it happen, they would have just came to the same conclusion a lot faster. But that wasn't really addressed when it happened. And that part of the story takes up the majority of the book. But when we start nearing the end of the book, it seems to change pace a little bit, and it kind of feels like I just jumped right into a different book. Because Uriel and Pausanias were able to get their message across, but also Grey Knights that intercepted it. And they're the ones that ended up extracting Uriel and Pausanias. And their involvement does make sense in the line of story, but when we start getting into the Grey Knights part of the story, it really does feel like we just jumped right into a different story. Since everything dealing with the Killing Ground took up probably about 90-95% of the book, and then we jump into this completely different part of the story. While necessary for the entire series as a whole to continue going, I didn't feel like it transitioned well enough into that. But overall, what did I think of the book? Well, not reading the omnibus, I was confused at the beginning. And I will say, if you haven't at least read the book before this, it will be hard to get into right away, unless you have some foreknowledge as to what happened. So it'll be tough to use this book as your jumping off point for the Warhammer in general. But aside from that, it's not a bad book. If you're not into the Ultramarines, it's probably not going to change your mind. But if you are interested in starting up on a series and follow Uriel and Pausanias throughout their careers, it will be a pretty good pickup. So, that's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth.